All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on some stories here from the southern tip of Africa. And joining me here is a regular on the channel, someone that I think a lot of people in my audience already immediately recognize, Mr. Rory Duncan. He's been a guest previously to tell some of the wild stories from his past, his experience in Africa. I think, Rory, the first time you were on my channel, we talked about your experience of stumbling into the chaos and carnage of the Rwandan genocide. And I think the second time we were talking about some of your experience as a bounty hunter, particularly was it in Zambia or in Zimbabwe? Which region was it again? The first time we talked about that chapter in your life?
Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. So we jumped around a little bit, yeah.
Well, welcome back on the show. I'm looking forward to it. Last time we ended the show before we could get to the second story that we had lined up. The first one was just so detailed, and then everyone's been begging me and hounding me ever since to have you back on. So I finally caved to the peer pressure. I thought the time was right. So I think now we can get into that. But before we get into the other story that we didn't get into last, maybe just for those in my audience, new audience members that have joined since, or people that haven't watched those previous episodes, just give us a little bit of an idea of where have you been all across Africa? Where has your life taken you on this continent? Just a little small overview.
Sure. So born in Rhodesia, lived in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia into Zimbabwe, and 12 years ago moved to South Africa. I spent a decade in Central and East Africa, doing high-end remote safaris, taking people out to see the gorillas, the Serengeti, the Ngorongoro, climbing the big mountains, the great deserts, Ethiopia, Eritrea, you name it. And spent a long time also as a guide, a professional guide in Zimbabwe. I had a number of tourism ventures of my own. I had a houseboating company, walking safaris. I worked for the Zimbabwe government during the post-independence period, just after the Civil War, up till about 10 years after the Civil War, where we still had a lot of banditry on the Mozambican side of Zimbabwe and the eastern side of Zimbabwe. And I cut my teeth in the national parks of Zim. Both my grandfather, my family, my uncle was the chief warden of Zimbabwean national parks up until 2010, I think 2012. And we just had free reign of all the parks. So we were just, able to really get out there, and we had great mentors. Old soldiers, old conservationists who taught us the ropes. And then, of course, growing up in a civil war surely, sharpens your mind and your skills with regards to handling weapons, to understanding danger and being able to protect yourself. And from there, I just ended up in as many people did, in the throes of the land grabs in Zimbabwe. And that's when my son, who was just 4 years old at the time, we moved to Kariba on the northwestern border of Zim, on the Zambezi River, on the Zambian border. And that's how I ended up migrating eventually to Zambia, and that's where the story begins.
Well, maybe before we get into the latest story, can you maybe just whet the appetite for the audience that didn't watch the previous one? What was your the previous episode that we talked about, where you went into that mountainous area to go find those bandits? Can you just give like a little bit, almost like a trailer for a movie, if anyone wants to go check that out after this episode?
Yeah. So in those days, the civil war in Mozambique had raged for over 20 years. 1 million people dead, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people displaced, hunger, war, millions of landmines. You can imagine the scenario, a true heart of darkness type of scenario. And as a result of that, some people went feral, particularly when the civil war started to cool off and Mozambique gained independence. There were so many people with AK-47s living rough and remote who just simply refused to return their weapons and join a normal society. And as a result, we ended up with multiple groups of bandits all along the Mozambique border with Zimbabwe, making incursions into the country. And I was a specialist at that time. I had a lodge up on a little village called Chimanimani village, and I had a walking safari business. And unfortunately, with that walking safari business, I couldn't take my clients into that area because it was so unsafe. And so in cahoots with the I see my sisters there. In cahoots with the Zimbabwe government, they sent me off with some specialist soldiers, and we ended up doing a big net drag across a vast wilderness, and ended up encountering some fascinating people, some violent and murderous and dangerous, and others who were just the last remnants of tribal hunters and what we would call nomadic hunters today. So yeah, that was the foundation for what we spoke of last.
Yeah, and that episode, for those that are curious, it's on my channel. It's called Hunting Dangerous Men in the African Wilderness, Rory Duncan. So after this, if you missed that episode, go check it out. The other one is called Heart of Darkness, the Rwandan Genocide, also Rory Duncan. You can find that on my channel as well. Two fantastic chats. I really enjoy them, and I know the audience that has watched them, I've only gotten positive feedback from them. But now, Rory, let's get to the next chapter. It almost feels like we're going through a book of all your experiences in your life. We've covered two chapters. Now let's get to chapter 3. So chapter 3 is about a man called Michael Mpofu, no relation to Dali Mpofu. But tell us the story. Where does place us in the context? Where does it begin? What year is it? What's the climate environment like, the political environment? Sketch the picture for us.
So picture, if you can, the land grabs in Zimbabwe have gone completely maniac. Displacement and the
early 2000s.
Early 2000s. My son and I are looking for a refuge. We buy a home up in a little town called Kariba, one of the world's largest man-made dams, lakes, 400 k's long, 100 k's wide, on the Zambezi River, the mighty Zambezi River. And then below that, downstream, you have the dam wall, and then you have the Kariba Gorge. And the Kariba Gorge runs for 30, 40 kilometers, and then it opens and it widens into what is the lower Zambezi Valley. So we're talking along the entire sort of northern width of the Zimbabwe-Zambia border. Half of the river is on the other side, Zambia, Zimbabwe on the other. And so my son and I are living quite happily in Kariba at the time. And I'm building houseboats. I've started a fishing company, a commercial fishing. I've started a tourism business. I've bought a hardware shop, and I'm doing whatever I can to keep myself alive.
How old are you at the time, Rory?
Man, that's I'm 58 now, so that's 205, 204. So yeah, 20 odd years ago. So I'm
so
in
in
my
your 30s then. Yeah,
I'm in my 30s then, and I'm feeling strong and full of the joys of youth. My son was about 4. I then was abducted from that home by ZANU-PF and the Central Intelligence Organization, and I spent an awful experience that lasted about 1.5 years. I was kept in what is basically a pit latrine for 2 weeks. I was then imprisoned. I was tortured. My passport was taken away. And eventually, when I was released, I left Zimbabwe for Zambia. So my son and I went across. And prior to my abduction, which is another story, we can perhaps talk about that one day. My sister will attest.
Chapter 4 of the book, yes.
Of the saga. Yeah.
Let's finish chapter 3 first.
Let's get there. So, yeah, prior to that, I was going across to Lusaka, because from Kariba in Zimbabwe to Lusaka, Zambia, it's only about 150, 180 kilometers drive. And I was doing some contracts there for Zim businessmen that had gone across to Lusaka and were building factories, guys making bull bars, guys making snacks. And I was fairly handy, and I was kitting out their factory. So I had some really nice contracts, a couple $100,000 worth. And that was my sort of introduction to Zambia, although my family has had business in Zambia for many, many years, particularly in the tourism business, firstly focused around the Vic Falls, and then also now and still on the very western remote part of the Zambezi along the Angola border, where we do tiger fishing safaris. But so I was well versed in Zambia and the culture and the people, had some good contacts there. And so once I got out of the prison and the hell, and they gave me my passport back, I went to Zambia with my son. There were some really fantastic schools there, and I put him into a school, and we settled with a little house in Lusaka City. Skip along a little while, I started a company there supplying boots and safety gear to the Zambian police, and was doing quite well financially. And I came across an opportunity to get some land for free from an African chief. And I thought it was only right, since what had happened in Zimbabwe, that I took that opportunity with both hands.
Right.
And as a result, I ended up with a fantastic piece of land along what is called the Kafue River. And that is a place that is typified by real lower Zambezi bushveld, mopani trees, baobabs, lions, buffaloes, black mambas, and the very last people on the edge of a wilderness. And not many people really understand true wilderness, and it's quite hard to find even in South Africa. But in Central Africa, you do get areas where, you suddenly come to a point where the roads end.
You're talking about untouched nature.
Yes, indeed. And you get a smattering of people, and then eventually it just becomes the true wilderness. And that's, of course, where the elephants and the wild dogs and everything plays. And it's also a place where the poachers spend their time, and the wild men hang out if they're not wanting to be caught. So my time there was fantastic. I built a beautiful camp up on top of this plateau. I could see 150, 200 kilometers in sort of 180-degree panoramic view under 8 giant baobabs. And we were living there quite happily and commuting between my son's school and my home and business in Lusaka. So we were up and down. And there was only one other white man that had a piece of land there, an ex-soldier from Zimbabwe called Dave Ottman. And I took a piece of land above his, in the hills above his farm. He'd created a banana farm there. And he was doing well with that as well. So I was building this camp, and my idea was to set up a tilapia farm, doing aquaculture with fish for protein for the big city. And so we were in the throes of that. And all of a sudden, at one point in about 2006, there's a city, a town on the way between where I lived at the farm and Lusaka, a place called Kafue Town. Some of your viewers will know it. It's unavoidable. You have to go through it on your way to the capital city. And at Kafue, there's a Kafue Bridge, and there's a major big police and army roadblock there 24/7. It's been there for 50 years. And one Saturday, we got a report to say that a group of armed men had hit the Chibuku brewery in Kafue Town and had a shootout there. They'd stolen somewhere in the region of $60,000 value in Zambian kwacha, had a shootout with Zambian police, killed a couple of police, wounded a couple of police, and then disappeared into thin air.
Sounds like
And
a story from the Wild West. Just bandits
yeah,
attacking a town.
yeah, or the N1, with the
Yeah,
cash and transit van. But yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, in context, yes, because it is a little town surrounded by the the huge Kafue swamps and the Zambezi Valley below, and so it is surrounded, as you like, by wilderness and jungle. And so we thought nothing of it, but it started to reoccur, and it happened quite a few times. And during my time there, I was very, very close to some important people. Part of my work, which I seldom talk about, was more in the intelligence side of things, where I became somewhat of an expert in understanding those who plunder natural resources, from Ranahorn and ivory to gold and diamonds, and human trafficking and money transfers and money laundering and that sort of thing. So as a result, I was close to certain people that got me closer to people in power. And once I met them, they wanted, of course, to have a little bit more of me. And so I was, over the time, somewhat of a honorary citizen officer of the president. In Zambia, they have a thing called the OP, the Office of the President. At the time, it was run by a guy called Regis Piri, a very astute and well-trained intelligence chief, part and parcel of the big Interpol, for Southern Africa, that sort of guy. And so I knew him, and we were observing a few things, which I won't talk about. But what happened was that my son and I were one day at our bush camp. And what day was it, Dan? It was a Saturday, Sunday, or Sunday afternoon. Yes, it was a Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. And you're talking about a place that's totally quiet. You hear drums at night from the villagers, but otherwise there's no vehicles, no sound apart from nature. And we heard this rushing through the bush. And the two of us, my son was only 5, 6, 7, 8 by then. We ran out of the camp and onto the big lawns that we'd grown there. And out of the bush ran 3 employees of my neighbor Dave in their overalls and their gumboots. And they were running at such a pace that those gumboots actually sounded like a herd of buffalo crashing through the bush. And at the same time, we heard a couple of shots fired in the background, down in the valley
Yeah,
below.
unmistakable.
Towards Dave's place. And these guys came in, they were sweating, they were gray with fear, and they just babbled out, "We're under attack, the farm's under attack, there's banditos. So I got them and my foreman, Joseph Nansenga, Daniel, my son, and I put everyone in the VX cruiser, and got my 9mm. It was the only weapon I had there, stupidly. Should have definitely kept an AK there, but it was just so chilled that I never thought of it before. And we drove out through the road that I'd made to access the camp, and that was perhaps 2, 3, 4 kilometers, and to a point where there was a little ridge where behind I could hide the vehicle, and behind this big baobab we could look down on the front entrance to David's farm. And so we hid ourselves there, and I was perhaps 40 meters from the gate, but at quite a steep elevation, so literally right above it. And out of the farm burst a little Toyota Corolla, and with guys sitting in the back windows on the windowsills holding that little handle with AK-47s in the typical sort of bandit style. And they drove up to the gate, and for some reason stopped at the gate right underneath us. And I had them, there. A 30, 40 meter shot with a 9mm is not wise against 3 or 4 AK-47s. So we hid and waited. We heard them chattering, and then they just 15 seconds, and then they were gone out on the dirt road. And in Zambia, you can buy these little Japanese imported cars, and they've lots and lots and lots of Toyota Corollas there come out in four-wheel drive with a little diff lock because of the icy roads. And they export those to Zambia, and so you can buy them. So these guys came across the Musaya River, which is about 1 kilometer wide of sand. Anyway, I let them go and then crept down the hill with the Land Cruiser. And once I thought we were relatively safe, I drove into Dave's farm, and I found some of his staff. Freddie, an old police sergeant, he was his foreman, a lovely old Zambian guy, was beaten up, really seriously beaten up. And what these guys had done is they had ransacked Dave's house. And thank God David and his 3 children and wife were not there. They were in Lusaka. And so they beat up Freddie and they smashed his house. And what was so interesting is because I'd built a tented camp, my entire collection of art and artifacts I'd given to Dave to hang on the walls of his home. And there's one particular painting that is truly special to my heart. It's sitting right here on the wall. And what they had done is they'd gone through the home, and with AK-47s, they'd smashed the paintings with the barrel. Never a good idea. A revolutionary bandit doesn't know about maintenance of firearms. So they'd smashed that. So we looked at Dave's ransacked farm for just a minute. If we told Freddie to sit still, and then I gunned that old VX and we bombed after them, because at the end of our road, at about 27 kilometers to the tar road, which is the Chirundu to Lusaka highway, you can call it a highway. It was a potholed mess, a little thin strip of tar. But at not too far from where my camp's road and Dave's road hit the tar, there was also a police block there. And so I drove to that police block and jumped out like a madman and said, "Did this Corolla come through with 4 guys?" "Yes, they've just gone through." I said, "Fuck, these guys are bandits, Yeah. They said, "What? Give me that radio, give me that radio." So we got the radio. I got the radio off him, and I asked him to radio Kafui, because fortunately now we had them trapped going up the Zambezi escarpment towards Lusaka, and there's no way that they could miss the roadblock at Kafui. So I knew we got them trapped. So we radioed ahead, and I used the same radio to get a hold of police national headquarters in Lusaka, and sent SMSs to Dave Ottman and to various other people that were in my reaction unit. And I did not pursue them up the hill. Instead, we waited at the lower roadblock for information. And then we got a radio message through about 45 minutes later that they had shot their way through the roadblock. And as we heard that, I then drove the 45 minutes up the escarpment to see the aftermath of the incident. And so what had occurred is the cops knew that they were coming. So they had all the AKs ready. They were ready for them. But instead of just, opening up on them, or at least just pointing 7, 8 AKs at them and saying, you're nabbed, the one cop tried to put his hand in and take the keys. And this guy was idling. And so he just put his foot down, and these guys just opened up willy-nilly outside the windows of the car. But there was one lovely chap that was working there, and he took a long shot at them as they sped off down the road towards Kafui, and he managed to clip one of them in the head. And they stopped around 500 meters past the roadblock and booted him out the car. He got up wounded and ran off into the bush, and they disappeared towards Kafui town, and they were not seen again. They abandoned the car and they ran off. In those days, MTN were operating in Zambia, and they had a special deal with the Zambian security forces and police with a free SMS thing and a location kind of software, which put out an all points bulletin to alert any cops that might be in a district where something might have occurred. And so they put out an APB at the Kafue district, and an off-duty policeman drinking chibuku literally under a mango tree in a village outside of Kafue town witnessed this chap walking in to the village with his tongue hanging down outside of his throat here, because that AK-47 bullet had come through the headrest of the car and taken his whole jowl off and ripped a piece of flesh off. So there was a hole here. Yeah, not pretty.
Ish.
But obviously he then arrested that chap who was pretty bad, and got him into town. And by the time I got into Kafue, they had pulled the bandit's car into the Kafue police station. I then proceeded to Lusaka, where they had taken this guy for medical treatment at Lusaka Central Hospital. And because we had certain security clearance, we were able to go in and see him. And we used a big pen to encourage him to write some details of who his team was. And sure enough, he did. And sadly, he died later on that day. But we got the names of 4 guys, and one of them was Michael Mpofu. And that is where the saga really, really starts now, because that guy had smashed my fucking artwork.
Now it's personal.
Yeah. And not only that, but he'd ransacked my pal's farm, and I just wanted him. So getting back to how the investigation went, eventually the dust settles. Dave comes back to his farm. We're all back there a few days later. We regroup and we call in the headman, the chief, and we make a big powwow, literally under a big baobab tree, and we all sit and talk about the events there, because you must, again, the concept is quite strange. There's no government in places like that. There's no cops coming or ambulance coming or police or 911 or there's nothing like that. And so what happens is communities form what they call vigilante, and obviously it's just stolen from the word vigilante, and they form these groups which are village security groups. And these guys are some of them have muskets. Occasionally, a couple of them have old illegal AKs. A lot of them have spears. A lot of them have machetes. And it's kind of like communal security groups, and where there's ever an issue. So all the guys that were involved in that, the head people of those various vigilant groups, all met with us and the chief. And it turns out that Joseph Nansenga, my foreman on my farm, was a senior headman. He had 11 wives, 27 children, and he was just a lovely guy. I really loved Joseph. And so it came out that no, this Michael Mpofu is from there. He's from our district. So we learned that he is half Zimbabwean, half Zambian, a Zambian mom, and a truck driver, Ndebele guy, from Matabeleland as a father, and that he was raised in Chirundu there, and that he's a real problem child. And so we start to gather information on him, but no one can tell us where he is. And it goes cold. Nobody has any information. There's just nothing about him. He's gone. He's disappeared. and we can't find him, and no one will say. Except that every 2 to 3 weeks, an attack would occur, not back in our district, occasionally in a village on a Friday night during a beer drink. His group would attack a beer drink and literally come in and steal women and girls and beer and their money and drag them off into the bush, rape them, get drunk, marauding. And
Typical
but
bandit stuff.
real bandits, you're talking about truly heathens. These are guys without soul. They are the closest definition to ultra psychopathic people that I've ever met. So they start these. They keep on robbing these areas up in the Highveld, up towards Lusaka, 3-4 times. And I think by the time we got close to when I started figuring out what was going on, they'd killed 8 policemen, and 2 of their guys had been killed, and the group was always between 5 and 8. Then one day they did such a hit, and we found another stolen Corolla, but they'd driven it into the bush and into the direction of some old elephant trails that led over the Zambezi escarpment and down into the Zambezi Valley. These are ancient trails. In fact, I'm sure that the Boers used those same trails to begin manufacturing some of the amazing mountain passes in South Africa. And so, they're a meter wide, a meter and a half wide, and they literally are ancient pathways. And so we tracked these guys to the top of the escarpment and then realized, this is what they're doing, because they would disappear. You wouldn't, absolute mayhem, and they would just disappear. So we went back down to the valley and we called together a very closed group under the chief, Nansenga Joseph. My friend was there, old Freddie, and a couple of the headmen that were really trusted by the chief, myself and Dave. Dave himself is a famous soldier. There's books written about him. Alexander Fuller wrote a book about him called Scribbling the Cat. And so we put our heads together, and eventually we put the 2 and 2 together, and we started getting informants to tell us that no, we believe he's in such and such a district. But you can't go there, Ernst. You cannot just go there. Firstly, you need to cross the Kafue River. There's no speedboats. You're going in an old fig tree that is cut into a dugout, and it's just a round log with a hole in it, and a guy on the back with a pole. You have to sit so still, otherwise you're in the drink, and it's full of crocodiles. And then on the other side of the river, you just get wilderness. Now, you can imagine, an area 250 kilometers by 100 kilometers with nothing in it. Where do you search, So we had to rely on intel. But fortunately, on the wild side of the river, there were still villages there, closer to the river itself. But, these guys were the wilder of the tribes people. So they were still living fully traditionally, drums every night, brewing their own beer, growing sorghum and millet, net fishing in the rivers, just fantastic people. They're really the last of the true tribal traditional people there. And those guys are real bushmen. And one of them in particular came and said, we know where he is, and we know what he's doing. So we took him out and we had conversations with him. And once I'd had all of the data, and I could sort of pinpoint this guy, I then went to Lusaka to Regis Piri, the head of the office of the president, and I said, okay, I've got him. I think I've got him. And
at this point, Rory, a lot of people are wanting this guy caught.
He's caused absolute mayhem. You're talking about 15, 20 murders, 8 policemen, multiple rapes, endless armed robberies, incursions. Just
He's
a
high on the most wanted list.
at the time the most wanted in Zambia. And his name became synonymous with that in the whisperings, particularly in those villages. So Regis Piri said to me in this exact words, he said, "You're telling me something that is unbelievable. I'm glad you've got him." And then he said, "Duncan, go and plant those cabbages." His exact words. And all he said was, "Bring his body back. The rest of them, leave them for the hyenas," you know. And so we began to put together a team to go there and get them. And our intel came through that he was definitely going to be, or he was definitely in his makeshift camp. And on that particular day, from around dark, we sent out our most trusted tribesmen about 5 kilometers apart on a trail in a general direction, and that we would cross the river. Then on a dugout, we would meet the first guy, and he would walk us to the second guy, and then to the third, who would eventually take us to the perimeter area of where this guy was camped. And so when I was ready, I called it in, and I said, "Okay, tonight's the night. It's on. Let's go." And down from Lusaka came a team that I'd worked with there. One of them was an Angolan called Joao. There was another second Angolan and 2 Zambian black dudes. How do I put them? Swashbuckling government hitmen, you know.
Yeah.
And different kind of dudes. They love their beer, and they're almost as cold-hearted as the bandits that they hunt.
And they've got a particular set of skills.
They've got a particular set of skills that very few people have, and as a result, that's why they are who they are. And often they're quite unsavory characters. You wouldn't go for a braai or have a beer with them, any ordinary day of the year.
Before we continue, Rory, we have a very good question from Sideliner Opinions, who asks, what language were you communicating in?
Okay, so very interesting. And greetings to our pal Sideliner. Yeah, so there's an enclave of Shona-speaking people there, and so I speak Shona. So we were speaking Shona, but predominantly with our crew and the tribes people around us. And how that happened was the North and Southern Rhodesia, there were only Tonga people in the Zambezi Valley. And the Tonga were removed when they built Kariba. And they were given lands further up the river in order for this development to take place. And then in the, don't quote me, 40s, yeah. They built, or maybe the late 30s, early 40s, they built the most wonderful steel bridge across the Zambezi called the Bight Bridge. Alfred Bight, one of Cecil Rhodes's pals. And during that construction phase, my grandfather actually had a hotel on the Zambian side, just under where the bridge is today. And a lot of the workers from that period ended up just staying there. And as a result, they flourished in a pocket there. So we spoke predominantly Shona and a bit of Tonga and English and a bit of Bemba.
I just wanted to get that. I know there's some other people with comments and questions as well. I will get to those at the end of the show, but I wanted to put that question in there because I think it's an important piece of context.
Yeah, as we would say, Ndioyo. So On the day, I took a Hilux double cab 4x4 Bucky 2.8 non-turbo bulletproof Bucky. I met these boys down in Chirundu at the police station. We met at about 4 p.m. We issued weapons at the police station. We put the little bit of webbing and stuff that we wanted to take with us, and we proceeded to the Zam Valley, just below where my actual farm was. And we drove there, and we sat on the river. What's it? Oh, sorry, there's a huge scorpion or something that's just walked in the lounge here. Oh, that's big. Oh, that's a giant thing. Sorry, it's a farm.
At least you're not scared of scorpions.
No, I think it's actually a big rain spider. It's about this big.
Oh, those are beautiful.
Yeah. So we then sat at the truck and discussed with the first person that was going to lead us across the river in these bloody pirogues, these dugouts, and then we would then continue on. So we talked a bit of strategy, and we mostly just sat around bored until the owls started screeching and the drums started playing in the village, and it was dark. And that darkness and we also drove to a place where nobody knew that we were there, because we didn't want any of the villagers to see us. So now this next section is all about the hike there and getting to him. We crossed the river in these dugouts, and then we began our march. And I would say 7:30 p.m. is when we started, and we walked till about just before midnight, 11:15 in the evening, through wild bush. This is a place where lions naturally occur, elephants, buffalo, the big five. No rhino, they killed those, but it's wild.
A lot worse things than a scorpion.
You have the Jesse bush. Yeah, man. Oh yeah, no, you got the Jesse bush. It's just a wild place, and it's pitch dark. So we're walking with a villager in front with his axe, and we're following him in silence, stopping every hour for a very quiet whisper.
And you're just using natural lighting as like the lighting from the moon. You're not using any other man-made light.
No torches whatsoever. The only lights we had were those lacquer little torches on the old Nokia 3310s, which were super. And they lasted for about 2 days. So that's what we carried as a light. Otherwise, we had matches, water, knives, guns, sidearms, ammunition.
But you were walking in darkness, basically. You were not. You had those torches by your side, but you weren't using them constantly.
Just in the pocket. So we're following a bushman, and these bushmen, this is second nature to them. So they walk. I mean, it's not like, hey, you can't be fucking tripping over shit and making noise, and it's a different world. Anyhow, cut a long story short, we get to the place where this guy says, okay, it's over there, and he won't come any closer. He says, no, I will go and hide now, and you'll find me here, but I'm not going any closer. And so that was then where we proceeded. We asked him, of course, what are we looking for? He says, no, you'll go, just keep on the left-hand side. There's a group of big trees, and then eventually you'll come to the rocks, which is basically the cliff face where the Zambezi escarpment rises first out of the Zambezi Valley. And he says, you just scoot along that cliff face, and then you'll see their little village. And he told us that they had been making these huts where they basically just with bark, they weave together a lattice of saplings, and then they cut with a sickle. They just cut bush grass, and they tie that on with bark, and then they lean those against the cliff in a place where water doesn't drip under, where you get a nice clean piece of white sand, and then they lay a reed mat in there, and that's home for these guys. That's home. So, I mean, weird people. They never bought anything. They never invested in anything. They had nothing. So we get to this camp, eventually to the outskirts of the camp, and we see 6 of these little bashas leaning up there. It's about a half moon, a third of a moon. We can see the glow of 2 fires, and otherwise it's total silence. And what we did was we walked, because we were only 4, and there were 3, 4, 5 of these bashas. So we came up, and we didn't know in which one this guy was, but they had been drinking, and so we could hear them, snoring and restless on their reed mats. And so we went creeping to each one, peering in, and eventually we found 2 guys, 2 empty, and then 1 guy in one. And we assumed the guy that was in one was him, because he's the boss. So what we did was we were 4, so we took 3 on 2, 1 on 1, and then we just said, "Hey, hey, hey!" And that was when all hell broke loose. They started fidgeting around, jumping, trying to pull weapons out, and as that happened, so they emerged from their bashas, and we opened fire on them. And we cut 4 of them down within a meter of where they came. But 2 of us peeled to where Michael Mpofu was, and we got him from either end of his basha with an AK-47. His men were lying, wounded and dying, screaming, some of them. You can imagine the sounds. That was when we turned on our little Nokia torches and had a look inside their bashas. We hit him over the head with an AK-47 extremely hard on the side of his head, knocked him pretty much out. We had brought with us shackles, ankle shackles, elbow shackles, wrist shackles, and a shackle from the wrist to the ankles to the feet, so that you're stuck like that. And we then finished off his men, shot them, and left them. We collected their weapons. We emptied the cartridges. We strapped them onto our prisoner, Mpofu, and we began the long 5-hour walk back to the car.
In total darkness.
In total darkness. But this was a little easier now, because we knew, we've neutralized the threat. We've caught the man, and we're good to go. Hello, Calvin. So now we're making our way back, and the going is only slowed by the pace that this bandit can walk at. But there was no way we were letting him have his legs free. So it was a shuffle the whole way. We were quite brutal with him, and I think he knew what was coming. He was very well behaved. We didn't rest. We didn't stop. We only stopped when we met the next lookout, who then took us the next way, drank a little bit of water, carried on, and eventually got to the dugouts, and then one by one were transported across. 3 of us in one, him in the middle, across, and then the other 2 guys. And then we told Joseph and the other village security vigilant guys that had helped us, go home and go away now, and leave us, and thank you. We would reward them in due course for their work. So we took Mpofu then to the car, and we stood around him, looking at him. I turned the car on and put the headlights and the hella floodlights on him to get a look at this chap, because we'd not really had a full view of him.
This guy that smashed your paintings.
This guy that smashed this painting, it's got a hole of an AK-47 in the bloody thing. It's probably got another $5,000 worth of value, the thing now. Certainly I won't let it go, and neither will my son. And there's this dude. But Ernst, what a character and what a scary man, like a living demon, I tell you. Bald as me, but hairless, no eyebrows. One hair feature on his entire body was the bottom of his chin. He had an 8-inch dreadlock coming off the end of his chin with a hand-beaten brass nut to swing on the end of it, and 3 little rasta beads above that. He was not big in stature, but around 6 foot, skinny, scrawny, and he had a completely withered left hand that was stuck pointing forwards, if I might do that. It was sort of stuck pointing forwards like this out ahead of him. And so we killed him there, Ernst. And we did a bit of a lotto as to who was going to do it. I was the leader of that group. And they said, Mr. Duncan, would you like to do the honors? And I said to Joao, please continue. And then Joao made a meal of it. And it was, while that happened and after it happened, I'd never seen anything like it in my life, and I've seen some quite brutal shit. But what Joao did was it was almost like sending a demon back to hell. He said, I said, take his chains off. You can't kill a man in chains. So we took his chains off. And then I said, Joao, carry on. So he made a big scene of, racking around in his AK. And he walked straight up to Mpofu in his face and he said, Mpofu! And he shouted at him in English. And Mpofu's immediate reaction was to stand to attention and say, sir. The Zambians, they say, sa. He said, sa. And he said to him, Michael Mpofu, you are a sinner. You have caused hell in my country. And as he did that, he walked around the back of him and he placed the AK-47 barrel on his coccyx. And in his ear, he said, the wages of sin. And then he let off a round, which blew off his coccyx, his penis, and the whole thing. Mpofu made a sound like a goat as he dropped to his knees. And then Joao put the AK-47 in this little gap here and whispered in his ear, his death, and then just popped him. And that was the end of Michael Mpofu. So we picked him up and we casually, and the stinky wild guy, man, full of blood now. And he got punished, just like you say, before his execution. I watched him die, his eyes go from shining black to dead, and we threw him in the back of the bucky. And it was now around 5 a.m. We'd been awake 24 hours, and we then drove him to Chirundu police station. I lie. We drove him then to Chirundu clinic, where they had electricity and a little morgue, a little cold room for dead bodies. And we drove into the hospital, woke the nursing staff up, literally kicked him off the back of the bucky, opened the fridge up, put him on a stretcher, and told him to put him in there. We took photographs of him with our cell phone in various positions, including headshots, and then we put him away. We went to the police station. No, sorry, we immediately went to a shebeen. We woke up the shebeen owner and got a case of castle beer, of lager, or two. That went on the back seat of the bucky. We then drove to the police station where they had a big power hose, and we told a skivvy there to clean it. The sun was up now, maybe 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, we sat behind the police station. The head of intelligence for the valley came and, got a report from us. We were, in fact, senior to pretty much everybody there in terms of hierarchy. So we had no reporting to do. And once the car was washed clean, it was actually my girlfriend's bucky. I never told her, but she did leave me. So, that might be justified. So we took him to the thing. We threw him in the morgue, and we drove drunk as skunks to Lusaka, through both of the roadblocks, all the way up to Lusaka Central Police Station, where I briefed the city commander there, dropped off his special forces guys, and went home, had a shower and a big fat sleep. But in closing, about Michael Mpofu, and just to tell you how resilient and how powerful people like that are, he goes into a village about a year before we got him, not far from where our farm was. And one of the vigilante guys recognizes him and hits him with a sugarcane knife. Now, you get a panga and then you get a cane knife, and a cane knife is about 6 inches wide. It's a hefty blade, and those guys sharpen them on their sharpening stones, and they swung that panga at him. It hit him. He put his arm up, and the panga embedded from his wrist bone down his entire femur, whatever this thing is, into his elbow. He then used the leverage of that guy holding his panga to pull him forward and headbutt him, and he ran off into the night.
That's why he had the little disabled arm.
That's why he had this disabled arm. And you cannot believe what we learned about him is that what he did was, for months, he barbecued he smoked his lower arm. And he not only did he smoke it to disinfect and to close it up, but he also made sure that it was in the positions that he could hold an AK-47. And those guys had nothing, owned nothing, never had a single possession. When their camp, after we'd finished them there, we searched their little camp. There was nothing. There would have been women there earlier, I think possibly hiding or in another camp, which we did not go to. But there were some used condoms, a big pile of dacha in a plastic shopping cap packet, and that was it. Guns.
No other earthly possessions.
No earthly possessions. No old pots, bit of mealie meal, 1 liter cooking oil, some salt. Absolutely nothing. I mean, they would have shot a waterbuck or a buffalo or whatever. They were far away. I mean, out of earshot of gunfire. So they were living off the bush, salt, cooking oil, and pop, and fresh bush meat, and then go on a raid every now and then and scoop up some whatever. So yeah, so that's my little story for you, Ernest, and I hope you enjoyed that segment.
Well, Rory, that's a fantastic addition to the collection of all your stories that we've documented on this channel of mine. I do see my channel as a little bit of a time capsule to document all these stories, immortalize them to the extent that as long as the internet and YouTube remains and all the other platforms where I upload them, that some fragment of these stories live on forever, or as long as the platforms exist where they are uploaded on. I want to read some comments before we start wrapping up. Sideliner Opinion says, Rory, I can see and hear you are a reading farmer. Yeah.
Mostly African history, Rhodesian history.
Dagbreker says, good evening, Arends and Rory. Just in time to join you gents on this adventure. That was at the beginning of the show. And Dagbreker also says you can fix a Toyota anywhere in Africa.
That's a
Yeah,
fact.
you can drive into any little village. There's going to be Toyota parts in there.
That's a fact.
It's one of the benefits of owning a Toyota in South Africa, and in South Africa as well. Colleen says Africa is not for the faint of heart. This place gets in your soul, and despite the danger, you can't help but love it with all of your heart. And I know you do love Africa with all of your heart, Rory. And there's a question for you that I want to end on from the chat. Sideliner Opinions asks, how do the remaining whites in Zimbabwe survive? Gated communities, high security, neighborhood watches, private security. I think to sum up his question, what is the situation like in Zimbabwe for the white minority that is still there?
So Zimbabwe has become a classist society, and the more money you've got, the more important you are, and the less money you have, the more vulnerable and insecure you are. So all spectrum of people exist there, just like here. You have poor white people. You have a lot of working class white people. A large proportion are people working in offices, trading companies, accountants, assistants in the tobacco industry, on farms, doing the books, mechanics and blue collar people. And those guys have a tough life, paycheck to paycheck. It's god awful expensive there. Zimbabwe's a terrible place to try and survive on a 10 or 20,000 rand a month.
Try and let your money keep its value.
Well,
whatever you get to save.
Everyone pays in US. I mean, that's at least one thing that they've figured out. And then, there's a hell of a lot of gated townhouse complexes now. A lot of people live in those. But in Harare city itself, lots of big fences now, lots of big gates, big walls, cameras, electric fences. Crime is rife and getting more so. It's not quite as wild as South Africa. But people are most definitely tucked away at night, and you've got to, mind your back there. It's not a peaceful place, and it's becoming more and more violent. Of course, poverty breeds problems, doesn't it? And South Africa is a perfect example of that.
Right. So let's end off with some of the closing remarks here from the chat. North Sea says, good guest. Dagbreker says, amazing story, Rory. Really love that.
Thanks, my friend.
The Freighter Watcher says, so the violence and killing was for pleasure, not motivated by poverty and oppression. She's talking about these types of just savage individuals you would encounter there in the bush, these people that you described that was just terrorizing communities all across the area.
Yeah, so every community has sociopaths and psychopaths, and those people that have a murderous urge and just don't care. They just don't care,
There's nothing sacred about human life to them.
Nothing sacred whatsoever, and they also, you must remember, guys like that don't fear death either. They got no life. They're empty souls. They really are the most dangerous people in the world because they care nix for nix,
Yeah, they're willing to kill and they're willing to die, or they're willing to be killed.
Willing to die, and nothing matters but their immediate gratification. And of course, I mean, can you imagine attacking a big a brewery with 1,000 people milling around, and you waltz in as a group of 5 or 6 guys with AKs, and you blow it up and you shoot some cops? I mean, that's like the ultimate, like, Saturday afternoon rugby game, right? For a psychopath.
Right. Then Stephanie says Rory is fearless. Ashley says, thanks, Adams and Rory. Always great to listen to Rory. The Freighter Watcher says, excellent guest. Thank you for sharing your stories, Rory. Sideliner Opinion says, Africa was and still is untamed. It is brutal, beautiful, cruel, and caring, all at the same time. David says, thanks, Adams. Rory's stories would make for good movies. And I think, Johan, we've run out a little bit of time, so I'm not going to be taking any more questions, but I'll ask Rory next time. I'll make a note of your question. He asked what happened to your farm and why did you leave Zambia, but I'll leave that for next time when I have Rory back on, seeing as we've run out of time. Rory, thank you very much for sharing another one of your exciting, amazing adventures here with us, brutal adventures at points. And I'll definitely have you on back in the future. But for now, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ernst. Thank you for everything you do for our country. God bless you, my friend. 100%.
And then just some housekeeping here for the audience. If I just want to remind you again, this is not the first time that Rory has been a guest on my channel, not the first story that he shared with us. The first episode, both episodes are available on my channel, previous ones. The first one is called Heart of Darkness, the Rwandan Genocide. That's the story of when Rory stumbled into the chaos and carnage of the Rwandan genocide as it was unfolding. And then the other episode was called Hunting Dangerous Men in the African Wilderness. That's also on my channel. And that's his manhunt on behalf of the Zimbabwean and Mozambican governments that he gave that little bit of a trailer for at the beginning of tonight's chat. I'm just going to read some more comments before we say goodbye. Chest Pain Instigator says, thanks, guys. Colleen says, thank you, Rory. Great bedtime story. Another great interview, Ernst. Appreciate you, all of you. God bless. Dagbreker says, thank you very much, gentlemen. Stephanie says, thank you all. And then lastly, Vivian says, great stuff, my brother. I think literally her brother.
Yeah, love you, Viv.
All right. Rory,
Zambia.
enjoy the rest of your evening, and we're going to chat again real soon. And to the audience, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for all of your questions and comments. And if you like this type of content, share them with friends and family. Share this video on your social media. Tell people to come check it out and why they should check it out. And if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, this Africa-centric content, you can subscribe to keep you up to date on when I go live or when I upload new videos. You can also click that bell icon. That's going to send you an email notification when I go live or when I upload a new video. There is a new video coming out very soon. You'll find it in my videos tab there on my channel. It's not yet available, and it's called South African Pravda. It's about just a summary and a documentation of how in many shameless ways and underhanded tactics that were used by the South African government and their lackeys and allies in the media to attack those that dare speak the truth about the South African government. You can look forward to that video. It's going to be released next week, Wednesday. Then 2 more episodes that are lined up. The last little detail before we say goodbye. On the 6th of May, we talk to Joost Strydom about Urania and Afrikaner freedom going global. And then on the 13th of May, we talk to Chris Waldberger about his ideas surrounding Friedrich Nietzsche, a little bit of philosophy there for you guys. And we're going to specifically be talking about his essay called The Will to Christ. So thank you very much for tuning in. Rory, once again, enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay safe. Stay exciting in your life. And I'll chat to you again real soon. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
And God bless.